We've got Gautam Chhaochharia. He's head of global markets India and at UBS. Gautam, good morning. Great to have you with us here. Thanks for your time. It's been a while, Prashant, this side. What's the team at UBS making? I mean, of the Trump victory and the implications here in India. If you've got a first cut out, I mean, just cross-asset across, equities, what happens to currency here, and the overall sense. Go on.
Morning, Prashant, and good to be back with you. Look, the first cut is a red sweep was at the margin of surprise. I think a Trump victory was being talked about in the markets for a while, but the extent of the victory was a surprise. Our initial take from the broader global macro desk is a lot of the trade reaction yesterday across markets, across asset classes, have kind of getting there to price in the big red sweep, so to say. So look, what happens from here on after the initial market reaction will depend on what Mr. Trump actually goes and says about his policy measures going ahead. But markets were paired for a Trump win, but the red sweep was a surprise. And the big moves have already happened, possibly.
Gautam, hi, great to have you on. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have had, UBS has had a house call which is a little more conservative, a little more cautious on India, even before the correction had set in. But now the market has cooled off about 9% from the peak. So what's the sense? Earlier on the show, we were talking to Hartmut Issel, and he said that perhaps, over the next 12 months, earnings could start looking better in India. But you tell us, what's your view? How do you read this quarter? And will the slowdown in earnings last?
Yeah, the cautious view on India was relative to emerging markets in general, not an absolute call necessarily. And that relative call was also linked to slower earnings growth in India versus the rest of EM and versus what the markets were pricing in, so valuations. But I think what's led to finally markets correcting in India also has been a weaker earnings season. Look, there has been discussion about this quarter being weak in terms of growth, earnings in a broad way. But the actual earnings were even worse than what the markets were prepared for. And that's kind of driven the correction which we have seen. The cash, from a technical perspective, we have seen cash being deployed with local funds, but they're still sitting on a large amount of cash. The global benchmarked investors would have possibly reacted as India's weight came down. It's a circular thing. Based on market movements, the weights in index change. China's weightage in index went up, India's went down. So there have been some adjustment around that. Now, look, the big picture for us, for Indian markets here, again, the Trump thing is done. What Trump policies are, both for China, for global, and for India, will matter. But I think more than all that, what will matter is the policy stance locally. Will RBI respond to slowing growth? Will we finally see some policy action from the central government, which we haven't seen till now? Or will we even see some positive surprise on the reforms agenda post all the state elections are done? So those are the things we think will be bigger drivers of the local market in India beyond what's happening globally.
But just to talk about that statement, you just made a statement saying need to see if the RBI responds on slowing local growth. So let me just focus on the slowing local growth. You really think that the economy is going into a bit of a slower grind? It's a notch lower. And, again, I just go back to that earnings question. So the second quarter, the sluggishness that we've seen, are you expecting this to last? What's so how do you put the earnings projections now for, say, the next 12 months, this year and the next?
So we do think the earnings will recover. I think second quarter possibly was a low in the short-term cycle. But obviously policy support will also matter. What happens to RBI's broader liquidity stance beyond the rate cycle stance? What happens to the fiscal stance from the central government? They will also matter. So I think the base case is we'll see some gradual loosening. The rate cut debate is out there, but again, there's broad consensus rate cuts will happen in the next 6 to 9 months. So that should support from a top-down perspective as well as bottom-up. We have seen signs of pickup in rural already, as has been talked about. So earnings growth should pick up from here. But is it enough to drive markets up, given where the valuations are despite the market correction, that's a debate. And for that to happen, I think you'll possibly need more positive surprise or possibly a further sharper, bigger loosening or reforms agenda. And then also, look, from our perspective, we also have a big India conference next week, and these are one of the debates which we'll try to get into next week with a lot of experts and investors at that event.
All right. Hi, Gautam. Good morning. Nigel on this side, and good to see you, Ben. What about positioning? I recall a few months ago when we chatted, you were talking about maybe a probable shift from industrials to consumption, taking a bigger chunk of consumption. How are you all right now in terms of positioning? Going by the corporate commentary, we have seen some of these industrial-related themes as well come off a little bit. So how are you all positioned?
Yeah. So look, industrials, we have been downgrading individual stocks, reflecting both valuations as well as specific companies' order book momentum. So we have been downgrading there. It's not tough to take a broader sector level view because that's the sector where we much more leverage to any policy easing if we see one. Consumption is a tricky one. It's a sector which benefits from any rural recovery which has been happening, and that's kind of being priced in many of the stocks, possibly. But also in a market where investors get worried, it's also a defensive, right? That's the place you hide. So consumption is always, you have to look in that perspective. And from our perspective, the way to reflect that in our positioning is still underweight consumer discretionary, automobiles, staples, stay neutral.
Okay, so all things put together, Gautam, to sum up the view, and we get the sense of caution. And I know what you're saying is that a lot will hinge on the policy decisions here in India. But all things put together, over the next, say, 6 months to 12 months, are you expecting the market to continue to consolidate? Any broad band that you could leave us with, consolidation or 5% upside, downside, any projections?
I won't give a single number, but the way to qualitatively put it, that is in the next 2-3 months, further consolidation is likely. But post that, there should be enough base and support, both from a valuation, earnings, and policy. And that's the base case for us, from where market can go up.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Gautam, we'll leave it on that note then for this morning. Thank you very much for joining in and giving us that view. That's the UBS call coming in on India, saying that apart from, of course, the Trump trade, the tariff issues, and all of the policy actions that will unfold in the coming weeks in the US, it's local policy action that will continue to be perhaps a bigger driver for the market here. Market, which for the time being is actually, the cut's a little deeper, 125 points now.
Policy Bazaar is a name I would just want to mention. It's up 5%, and it's got, for this point in the day, decent-sized volumes. Ever since they announced that hospital, that managed healthcare sort of kind of unit which they want to set up, and market slammed the stock from highs of 1900, it's been in a range. And as we speak, it's trying to get out of that range. So it's been in that range since the 25th of September. Let's see. But that's a big move coming in on a fairly large stock now, guys.
Well, that's